My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Ann Mollengarden, and I am the Education Director for the Birmingham Holocaust Education Center. And we are so thrilled to be able to bring Amy McDonald to you. Many of you know her personally, and others who don't, you will get to know her through this workshop. But she is both a dear friend and a wonderful teacher and wonderful historian. So I know you're in for a treat this morning. Let me just tell you a little about her for those of you who don't know her. She is chair of the Social Studies Department at Shades Valley High School here in Birmingham, where she teaches AP US History and Holocaust Studies. She's become an integral component of the BHEC and a dear friend since 2009 when she first started teaching a semester class on the Holocaust. She now serves as an educational consultant for the BHEC and continues to enrich our research and outreach to teachers. Amy received a Bachelor of Science in Social Work and a Master's of Education in Secondary Social Science from the University of Montevallo. She was also the co-founder and co-director of Honor Flight Birmingham, for which she received the 2011 Natalie Moulton Gibbons Alumni Achievement Award from the University Montevallo, which was a special commendation. She also received a commendation from the Alabama Senior Citizens Hall of Fame, the GAC Youth Leadership Program Veteran Supporter Award, and the National Veterans Day 2012 Soaring Eagle Award. In her work with Holocaust Studies, Amy attended the 2011 Jewish Foundation for the Righteous Summer Institute for Teachers at Columbia University. She annually attends the JFR Advanced Seminar, and in 2012, 16, and 17, she participated in the JFR European Study Program to Germany and Poland. In 2013, Amy was the recipient of the Robert I. Goldman Award for Excellence in Holocaust Education. Amy became a fellow with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2015 and has remained an integral cohort of their MTF program. In 2017, she published the story of Birmingham survivor Max Steinmetz of blessed memory. The book is titled Determined to Survive, a story of survival and one teacher's passion to bring that story to life. Amy's research included detailed interviews with Max over the course of several years, as well as traveling to his hometown of Târgu Lăpuș, Romania, as well as all of the camps where he was held prisoner and following the path of his death march. This research was facilitated by a grant that she received from Alabama Public Television's Fund for Teachers program. Amy completed Word Smugglers in April of 2021 after extensive research with historian Sam Cassow, who she came to know through her studies with the JFR. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Amy McDonald.
Hey, everybody. First and foremost, this is just, like I said, this is like a reunion. I mean, I have missed so many of you. Most of you I know, some of you I don't know, but I can't wait to get to know you and hopefully meet, and hopefully soon we're done. You know, Zoom is great. Without Zoom, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of this, but I'm also ready to like hug a lot of people again and see a lot of people again. I wanted to start, you know, I'm about to start my 27th year of teaching. I'm just going to keep on keeping on. I'm going to keep plugging away. But Ann was talking about the first book and that I worked on with Max. And, you know, I want to say it feels, he passed away in March of this year. And it's almost, I feel so strange. I felt really strange working on another book because I felt so devoted to the purpose and the mission that I had with Max. So, you know, it's just something I'm working through, but this has been a wonderful opportunity to even be able to write this second book. But I guess what I'm saying is, even with a second book, I feel like I'm always keeping Max in mind. So I hope he heard that. I wanted to start off because Anne thought that one of the most interesting things, and I do listen a lot to Anne, believe me, she thought that one of the most interesting things to all of you might be just kind of how this book came about. Most of you, I'm pretty sure, know the history, and I'm going to go through the historical context and everything, but just the fact of being able to work with and have conversations with Sam Cassell was pretty amazing. So let me go ahead and share my screen and hopefully not screw anything up. And some of you have already seen it, but this is what the book looks like. So this is Sam. This is, if you have heard Sam speak or if you have read his books, I mean, his major work is this book, Who Will Write Our History? And Who Will Write Our History, the book, was made into a film, which came out in 2019. If you haven't read the book or seen the film, I highly recommend it because it's incredible. And there's also a film, I think it's Be Facing History, that's available in the classroom. It's a classroom version of the film. But I first heard about this whole story of the Ringelblum archive from Sam. And, Sam is currently professor at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'd heard him speak several times, mainly through the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. And when I heard him speak in 2019, something struck me about what he was talking about. And I got this idea, and I started thinking about focusing on a few specific characters and highlighting their role. And the characters that really stood out to me, I mean, we know Emanuel Ringelblum, we know Rachel Auerbach, but the characters that really stood out to me were a teacher and two of his teenage helpers, former students. And I thought, that really strikes a chord with me. And we're going to talk more about them in a few minutes. But I started asking, I emailed him and asked what he thought about maybe doing something geared towards students. Because, if you've read his book, I mean, it is a scholarly work. I mean, it's incredible, but it would not be, I wouldn't think, for students. And so I really thought that focusing in on Israel Lichtenstein and Nahum Gazevich and David Graeber, the teacher and his students, would really strike a chord with students in general, and especially maybe focusing on their really special role of not armed resistance, but spiritual, cultural, personal resistance. And so that's kind of what got me started on this process. And Sam very kindly replied to my email, and he gave me some pointers, and I began to write. And this was, I've never written this. Is kind of a story, more in a narrative. This is new for me. And I would send it to him, and he would reply back. And this went on for almost 2 years. And he read, he edited, he offered input and suggestions. He shared invaluable resources with me, which some of these I'll get to show you a little later. But I think I asked him so many questions about Rachel Auerbach, and I kept thinking, why can't I find anything she's written? Well, she's written a lot, but it's all in Polish, and she hasn't been translated into English yet. So I think I asked him so many questions about her that he finally, and this was just a treasure trove, sent me what he's working on as far as translating her writings into English. And so talk about a rabbit hole. I mean, I got lost in Rachel Auerbach for days and weeks just reading what she wrote. And I was just I felt so honored that he shared that with me. And I learned so much. And I can't wait until his book comes out where he's translated her works into English. So he has just kind of patiently walked with me through this process and just still helping me out with contacts. And I think we've I sent him a thank you package, kind of like a Southern thank you package. And I sent him a t-shirt and a sweatshirt and some different types of food. And one of the things that I sent were grits, a package of grits, milled in Wilsonville, Alabama. And the funniest thing where he and his wife both got on Zoom and they said, "What does one do with grits?" And so we had to talk about people eating grits. But I just, I don't know if anybody has any, do we want to do, if you have any questions about just that whole process with Sam, I wanted to talk about that first. And then, you know, before I kind of dove into just the background of the story, does anybody have any questions just to kind of about the initial process? Or if you don't, that's fine, we can move on. But if you do, you can unmute yourself and ask. And if anything's in the chat, Anne, can you let me know? Okay, so I'm just gonna, if anything pops up, just save it for later and we'll go from there. So to put this into historical context, and I'm always gonna put it in historical context because I'm a history teacher. This whole story starts with the German invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939, which starts World War II. It continues with the massive bombing of the city of Warsaw, the German occupation of Warsaw and then Poland, and then the eventual creation of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940. So a lot of these pictures that I'm using now are in the book, but I think they pretty much show the devastation of Warsaw. And just to give some background of the invasion of Poland and then the fall of the city of Warsaw. I mean, German tanks reached Warsaw about 5 days after the initial invasion, and they were initially pushed back by the Polish military. So the city was pretty optimistic and even defiant in the face of this German attack. But then the Nazis began shelling and bombing, aerial bombardment. And by the second week of the war, there was no longer a fighter defense, ammunition for anti-aircraft guns had given out. On the 13th, September 13th, first day of the Jewish New Year, the Luftwaffe specifically targeted Jewish sections of the city. By the third week, the Germans had cut the water supply, gas supplies, no electricity. The city was basically on fire, and the dead and the wounded were piling up in the streets. Civilians were huddling in basements and air raid shelters. They were forming bucket brigades. And if you've started the book, this is kind of the start this is where the book picks up. By the 28th of September, the siege was over. Warsaw had fallen, and about 25% of the city was virtually destroyed. There was no running water, there's no electricity, there's no gas, and approximately 50,000 civilians had been killed or wounded. So enter Emanuel Ringelblum. This is a picture of Ringelblum and his son, Yuri. And before the war, he was a really up and coming, prominent Jewish historian, writer. He was a high school teacher. He was a relief worker. He was a community organizer. And he was also very active in lots of organizations, YIVO, the Joint Distribution Committee, his political party, which was called the LPZ. Just to give you some examples of his organizational and relief work, in 1938, when the Germans kicked out or expelled Polish Jews from Germany and kind of dumped them across the border in this no man's land, Ringelblum was sent by the JDC to organize relief and assistance. In 39, just before, in August of 39, he was attending the 21st Annual Zionist Congress in Geneva, Switzerland. And while they were there, the delegates got news of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, and it pretty much delivered the news that war was inevitable. So a lot of the delegates at the Congress wondered if they should stay in Switzerland. But Ringelblum was determined to return to Warsaw, and he got there just as the war began. And I tell you that story because there are so many themes to me with Ringelblum, but one of them I think that stands out is, he had so many opportunities to leave or to run or to escape, and he remained. He returned. He chose to stay. So he returns to Warsaw, and as the Nazis approach Warsaw, there's this mass exodus from the city. People are fleeing the city. And among this would be the majority of the Jewish leadership, the heads of relief organizations, political leaders. And Ringelblum was urged to leave along with this mass exodus, but he refused to leave. And he tried to convince other Jewish leaders to stay and help with the relief effort. During the bombing of the city, he was part of one of the civil defense groups that manned the rooftops. He fought the fires on the rooftops. He kept going to his office at the JDC every single day, and he immediately began work setting up soup kitchens and helping out the tenants from burnout apartments and the refugees that were streaming into the city. And he begins pretty soon after the German invasion, he begins keeping a journal. He referred to them as his notes from the Warsaw Ghetto. And I kind of hesitate to call it a diary because diaries usually reflect people's emotions and feelings. And, Ringelblum was he strove for objectivity. He wrote about what he saw and heard, but he very rarely described how he felt about it. So the city has fallen. The Germans are now occupying Warsaw and the rest of Poland. And this is a reign of terror, basically. Didn't take long for Jews and Poles both to feel the terror of this occupation. Refugees are pouring into the city from outlying areas. They're bringing news of Nazi atrocities. Anti-Jewish decrees immediately go into effect, and you can see some of these up on the screen. Aryanization of Jewish businesses. Jews couldn't go to certain public places. They could only keep a certain amount of cash in hand. They were forced to wear the white armband with the blue Star of David. Their Jews were seized off the streets for forced labor. And there are massive food shortages. And because of the food shortages, people waited for hours in line for bread, soup, whatever. And when Poles would point out Jews in the soup lines, the Germans would throw them out of the line. And Ringelblum wrote, he said, Poles who didn't know a word of German soon learned how to shout Jude. And I want to include in this presentation as many of his thoughts and his words as possible. So after the establishment of the ghetto is next, as far as things that are waiting in line for the Jews of the city of Warsaw, Ringelblum writes in his journal, and this is very telling. He says, the Saturday the ghetto was introduced was terrible. People in the street didn't know it was to be a closed ghetto, so it came like a thunderbolt. The fact that it was going to be a closed, sealed ghetto was a huge deal because now access to the Aryan side is going to be forbidden. There was a lot of hope that contacts that Jews had with Polish friends, Polish neighbors, business contacts, that those contacts would be able to, those lines of communication would remain open. Those contacts would still be able to help them. People, their friends on the other side would be able to help them with food and things that they needed, even some of their belongings that they had left with them. So the fact that the ghetto is going to be sealed was a thunderbolt. And it also made it impossible for Jews to obtain food. And if you look at this calorie allotment, this was what was the ration or the calorie allotment established by the Germans. Calorie allotments per day: Germans 2,613, Poles 699, Jews 184. What this did was it guaranteed starvation. It guaranteed starvation, slow starvation, in a matter of months, unless you could find other ways to get food, unless you had other resources that you could rely on for food. And this is going to play a huge role. This is why smuggling became such a huge deal in the Warsaw Ghetto. So in November 1940, Ringelblum, after the formation of the ghetto, he calls a secret meeting. And he calls a secret meeting of some of his closest colleagues and friends. And his plan was to organize this top secret organization that would document. It was all about documenting daily life of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto under Nazi occupation. And the writings would be collected, they would be hidden, they would be used later, not just as a historical record, but also hopefully as a way to serve as evidence against what the Germans were doing. And it had a code name. The Oyneg Shabbos was the code name of this archive, and that means joy of the Sabbath. And it was given this name because they met on Saturdays. The executive committee of the organization would meet on Saturdays because that's the Jewish Sabbath, and that would avoid any suspicion. So the makeup of the group total was about 50 to 60 people. There was an executive committee of maybe about 10 people. They had a team of copiers, people who hand copied documents, 2 copies, sometimes even 3 copies in case the originals were lost or destroyed. And there was an even more secret group within the group that nobody else knew the identities of. And this group was the teacher and his 2 students, Israel Lichtenstein and Nahum and David. The only, they were the secret group who knew the physical location of the archive. They were collecting, they were the ones that the collections of the writings and everything went to. They knew the location and they waited on the signal to bury it. And the location was in the basement at 68 Nowolipki Street. It was the basement of a former school. And so these guys, Emmanuel and another guy named Hirsch Wasser, were the only ones who knew the identity of these 3. Sam Cassell kind of said it was kind of like a firewall. Nobody knew the identities of others to promote secrecy. Out of this whole group of 50 to 60 people, only 3 survived. And the 3 survivors were Rachel Auerbach, Hirsch Wasser, and his wife, Bluma Wasser. So if we talk more about the archive itself, it was this collaborative effort. It was a big collaboration. The idea was to get as accurate of a picture as possible from as many diverse experiences and people as possible. And Ringelblum and his team, they reached out to, you know, not just historians and not just the intellectuals, they reached out to people from all walks of life. Ringelblum said everyone wrote, and the scope was really, really wide. There were men, women, young, old, rabbis, religious, non-religious, Jewish leaders, wealthy businessmen, poor workers, refugees, journalists, teachers, children, young people. So the contributors, the writers, never knew who else was participating, and they never knew who else was involved to promote secrecy. The only people who knew who all the contributors were Ringelblum and the executive committee. The people in the ghetto didn't know the archive existed. So the executive committee are the ones that decided what types of documents to include. And they would kind of fan out throughout the ghetto, and they would go out and visit people who were writing, and they would encourage them to meet their deadlines. I mean, can you even imagine people who are trying to write and meet deadlines when they're starving, when they're sick, when they're worried? And they would go out and they would encourage them to keep writing. The executive committee raised money to buy paper and notebooks and writing supplies. And they did what they could, when they could, to keep certain writers alive. They would send them with an extra ticket to the soup kitchen at Rachel Auerbach's soup kitchen. And to introduce Rachel Auerbach, one of my new heroes, kind of one of my new obsessions, I can't read enough. Before the war, she was a writer and an editor in Warsaw, and she had met Ringelblum years earlier through his work with the JDC, but she really didn't know him very well. So when the Germans entered Warsaw, she was preparing to leave. She had a ticket, she was preparing to leave the city to go join her family. So she was really kind of surprised when she got this message that Ringelblum was looking for her and wanted to meet with her. And so she went to his office, and they sat, and he asked her if she would open a soup kitchen. And she told him, she said, look, you know, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm leaving to go join my family. And he said, we can't all run away. We need you here. And Rachel writes that she knew then that she was going to stay. And so she immediately got to work, and he gave her details about this soup kitchen that was going to be at 40 Lezno Street. It was one of the buildings that hadn't been destroyed in the bombings. And she recruited a group, and they went searching through bombed out buildings. They were looking for plates and spoons and bowls, food, anything that could be used in a kitchen. And she found a few notebooks, a carton of plums, half a sack of rice, and a few packets of dried fish, and the soup kitchen started. And on the first day the soup kitchen operated, they served 50 bowls of soup. Within 2 years, the kitchen at 40 Lezno was serving over 2,000 meals a day. And the soup kitchens and the self-help organizations and the attempts of the Jews in the ghetto to take care of their own, you know, the soup kitchens were one of the ways to add to the ration allotment. And, you know, Rachel Auerbach often said, you know, she came to the grim discovery that really the soup kitchens weren't keeping people from starving. They were really kind of delaying the inevitable. And she became so distraught sometimes that all that they were doing seemed to do so little to prevent deaths by starvation. This next point resistance does not always involve the use of armed weapons might be, or I think it is, one of the really important things that we can stress to students. Because if your kids are anything like mine, they cannot comprehend why the question is always, why didn't they do something? Why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they resist? And the answer to that question is, well, they did. Maybe a better question would be, how was it even possible for them to resist in any way, considering the circumstances and the situations that they were in? And whether we're talking about the Warsaw Ghetto or there were daily acts of cultural, spiritual, personal resistance in hundreds of ghettos, hundreds of camps, hundreds of prisons, all across Nazi-occupied Europe. Within just the Warsaw Ghetto, though, we know that there were secret educational and religious activities. There were underground newspapers. Underground newspapers made up a huge portion of the archive. Youth groups, theater productions and plays, secret libraries. One of my favorite stories is about a woman named Basha Behrman, who was, she survived, did these secret libraries in the ghetto for children. There were underground prayer services. There was smuggling. Smuggling was a huge act of resistance. Smuggling of food, smuggling of medicine, smuggling of arms into the ghetto. There were soup kitchens. There were house committees. All of these there was writing. All of this would be considered acts of resistance. And I think this is a really important point that we need to make to students. So if you look at what was included in the archive, there were more than written materials. There were a lot of written materials. There were essays and reports and questionnaires, but there were also, and I'm gonna have to read this list because this amazes me. There were underground newspapers, ration tickets, postcards, German orders, invitations to events, theater posters, tram tickets, reports from doctors and nurses, candy wrappers, jokes, poetry, drawings, paintings, photographs. There were lists of the bail codes and the tenants of apartment buildings. Ringelblum said, collect as much as possible. He told Hirschwasser, they can sort it out after the war. And that's exactly what we're doing now. An obvious turning point in the Warsaw Ghetto would be the Great Deportations, which began on July 22nd and went through the first part of August 1942. July 22nd was so poignant to me when I read, he said it was a Wednesday. It was a day that started like any other day, but the beginning on July 22nd, from that day forward, every day, SS guards, Jewish police would blockade the streets. They would search the buildings. They would check documents. And every day, 5,000 to 6,000 Jews would be marched to the collection point, which was known as the Umschlagplatz. They would be put on cattle cars and they would be sent to Treblinka. Every day, 5,000 to 6,000 Jews. Every day, about 55 cattle cars rolled into Treblinka. So the leaders of the Oyneg Shabes were traumatized. Some of the members had been rounded up and deported. They were terrified, along with everyone else in the ghetto, and they began to hurry to collect as many documents as they possibly could. I just discovered this quote from Ringelblum just a day or two ago, and I think it stands out as one of the ones that touches me the most, and I'm going to read it to you. Ringelblum stated, "The Oneg Shabbos work was interrupted. Only a handful of our friends kept pencil in hand and continued to write about what was happening in Warsaw in those calamitous days. But the work was too holy for us. It was too deep in our hearts. The Oneg Shabbos was too important for the community. We could not stop." And if you think back to when we first started talking, we talked about what the goal of the Oneg Shabbos was at the beginning. Document daily life in the Warsaw Ghetto. Well, that focus changed. It shifted. Early on, it was to document. It was daily life. It was how Jews were living in Nazi-occupied Poland. But by 42, and especially after the Great Deportation, the focus changes. And instead of writing about daily life in the Warsaw Ghetto, they're documenting the deportations. They're talking about the fate of Jewish communities around Warsaw, throughout Poland. They were basically documenting their destruction. And there was also the goal of trying to smuggle information out of Poland to London and the West. So the archive is going to be buried, and we could talk at length about how the story of how this came to be. And it's going to survive the complete destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was buried in 10 metal boxes like these 3 and 2 large milk cans. So the first cache is going to be buried in August 1942, early August, at the height of the Great Deportation. Hirschwasser delivers a message to Israel and the 2 boys, and the message said one word: legend. And that was the code word to bury the archive. The second cache, which includes the milk cans, are going to be buried in February 1943, before the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which happened in April of 1943. So the war, after the war, Rachel Auerbach speaks at a commemoration, 3rd anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And someone who was at the event wrote down her words. And they said, she demanded, she said, "Remember, there is a national treasure under the ruins. The Ringelblum archive is there. We cannot rest until we dig up the archive. Even if there are 5 stories of ruins, we have to find the archive. I'm not making this up. I know what I'm talking about. This isn't just talk. This is coming from my heart. I will not rest, and I will not let you rest. We must rescue the Ringelblum archive." Unfortunately, after the turmoil of years of war, there didn't seem to be a lot of interest in looking for an archive. But Auerbach and Hirschwasser persisted. And with money from the Jewish Labor Committee in New York, the search began in the summer of 1946. And these are some of my favorite pictures. The first cache was discovered in September 1946. The second was the milk cans were discovered in December of 1950, 4 years later. There was a third cache of documents that were buried, and it has never been found to this day. They've looked, they've searched again and again and again, and it has never been found. So in this first discovery of these 10 boxes, in one of the last boxes that were buried, they found the last wills and testaments of Israel, Nahum, and David. And I'm not going to read these out loud to you. You can read, but some of the parts that stick out to me from this would be, he considered himself the guardian of the treasure. He hid the materials. May the day come when someone will find them. He only wants to be remembered, and he only wants his wife and his small daughter to be remembered. Nahum said, and this one I am going to read because I think it's so poignant. Right now, even as I am writing, I can hear the terrible sound of shooting coming from outside. If there's any one thing I'm proud of, it's that in the very worst of the terror, I helped bury the treasure. I hid these documents so that you might know about the suffering and the killing that marked the Nazi tyranny. I'm going to run to my parents and see if they're all right. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Remember, my name is Nahum Gazevich. And today, if you go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, this is one of my favorite spots to stand because there's this milk can and there's this quote from this 19-year-old kid who wrote his last will and testament. He could hear the sound of shootings and the Germans coming closer street by street. And this is a very famous quote. And he wishes he could live to see the moment that the great treasure will be dug up and shriek to the world, proclaiming the truth. And this line has always touched me. May the treasure fall into good hands. May it last into better times. May it alarm and alert the world to what happened and was played out in the 20th century. We may now die in peace. And in this overall scenario, we can remember that in this case, history was not written by the victors. And Sam Cassell talks a lot about this order of brothers, these comrades. So I think with Emmanuel's words, this is a good way to kind of wrap it all up. But I just, so that's all I've got. Now I would love for y'all to ask some questions. I think we're supposed to take a break in like about 10 minutes. So maybe we have like 10 minutes or so for questions.
So just to share what's in the chat in case you have not looked at it, Robert shared that the primary sources used in the book are a lesson in themselves. Thank you for including them. And then Anna wrote, Primo Levi writes in The Drowned and the Saved, that the question is not how few Jews resisted, but how remarkable the vast amount of resistance given the conditions in extremis. And then Robert commented on that this is an important point for students to wrestle with. So thank you.
Yeah.
Amy, can you go back to that last slide?
Hold on. Are you still seeing my screen?
I am.
This one?
The last one with the quote. No, the one right after that. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
I mean, I will just add that it's not often in the classroom that you can do a deep dive into something like this, but this is a deep dive that would really touch a lot of students, sort of a hero kind of a thing, and the way the sacrifice and how it was discovered. It's just an amazing story. So thank you.
Yeah, I know for myself, I consider myself, I don't know, I've done a lot of training and tried to continue to learn, but there's so much about even just the Warsaw Ghetto, life in the ghetto, that I had no clue about. And it's telling you, you just can't learn it all. I was, for this small little book, I mean, this, and written in hopefully a simple way. I mean, the research was just mind-blowing.
Laura Boughton commented, terrific job in making this story so accessible and readable for high schoolers. Great new resource. And then Amy Martin asked, how did you get started in this research?
Like, as in, how did I get started in the research? Well, my first, I guess, go-to was Sam Cassell's book, The Who Will Write Our History. And the more that I read, so that was a huge source. I read Ringelblum's journal. There's another great source. This guy he was a contributor to the archive. His name was Peretz Opashinsky, and he was the ghetto mailman. And his writings were phenomenal as far as talking about everyday life in the ghetto. So I did a lot of that type of reading, of journals and diaries and reports. I looked at a lot of what was actually left and found in the archive, the things that have been translated that I don't speak Polish or Yiddish, but there's a lot of that that's been translated. So there are lots of, Yad Vashem has some wonderful video clips on resistance and on the Ringelblum archive. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has some great resources. The Jewish Historical Institute, the Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw has been very helpful. If I email them, they respond, and they've been really, really helpful. So that's kind of how it's slow. I'm a slow, writing to me is a slow process, but I did a lot of reading and a lot of note taking. So that's kind of how I started that's my process of research.
Felicia commented, I love the chronological organization of the book as it leads the reader into the increasing chaos of the inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Felicia. That's true.
Amy, can I just jump in real quick? I just
Sure.
want to thank you so much, first of all. And unfortunately, I have to cut out a little bit early, but I'm really interested in historiography. And, Sam Cassell kind of lays that out at the beginning, and having students struggle with the idea of, what was the ultimate, value of this, of writing something at the time that it's happening, as
Yes.
opposed to telling the story later, and really having students to think about the relative value of those things. And I think that's if you want to make some comments about that, I appreciate that.
Yeah, Cassell writes, he says, without the archive, there are so many things we would not know. I mean, we would obviously have the view of perpetrators. We would have the accounts of survivors, but we would not know, without the archive, we wouldn't know about the intense struggle, the intensity of the daily life in the ghetto. I mean, the mosaic almost of Jewish experience, the poetry, the jokes, the sermons, the religious writings. We wouldn't know about, he said, at the top of the milk can, we wouldn't know about the underground newspapers. We wouldn't know about the organized attempts at resistance, the way that resistance evolved you know, the idea of resistance evolved, because as it became apparent, and you nailed it, he said, these were observations in real time. These were observations being made by people who didn't yet know their fate. You know, as far as they were concerned, they were trying to hang on until the end of the war. You know, they had no clue that their fate was to be deported to a killing center. They had no clue that a ghetto, 500,000 in population, would be reduced to 60,000 in a short period of time. So you see a change from, like we talked about, the focus shifted from real time documenting daily life to there's a realization we're documenting our destruction. So yeah, I mean, Kassow makes a real statement that without the archive, you know, it's invaluable, because there's so much about Jewish life and the struggle, and that we would not know.
I love your the kind of imagery of the mosaic, because it really was not a single story of, you know, just intellectuals writing. It was a story of everyone across the society writing, and I think a lot of that would have been lost, you know, had it not been for these.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You're a champ. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert.
So Alexandra Zapruder commented, listening here and so moved by what you've done, Amy. This story is endlessly haunting and inspiring, and I think it's just so important to bring it to a level that young people can absorb and understand.
Thank you, Alex.
And Debbie Maller asks, do researchers know if anything similar was done in any of the other ghettos to such an organized and extensive way?
Yeah, great question.
And actually, Alex responded to that, yes, in Lodz, Vilna, and Terezin. So
yes. In fact, one of the points on one of the slides was this was the largest secret archive, but it was not the only one. There were archives in Vilna, Bialystok, Lodz, and they had similarities and they had differences. Some of the differences would be that in these other ghettos, the archive kind of had more support and backing from maybe the Judenrat. There was more of an interaction between the leaders of these archives and the Jewish Council. The Oneg Shabbos, however, was very kind of leery of the Jewish Council. They, in fact, oftentimes kind of steered away from having certain people contribute to the archive if they were heavily involved with the Jewish Council. So there was, you know, there were similarities and there were differences, but this was not the only archive. I mean, there was a Kovno ghetto. There were different examples of books, documentation, letters, things that were hidden and later retrieved.
Jennifer Edwards asks, is there a current effort to find the third cache of documents?
Doesn't that drive you crazy? Supposedly, you know, they think it's buried. They think it's under the Chinese embassy. And suppose there have been like these massive efforts to find it, and they just can't locate it. You know, who knows if it was found and destroyed or if it's still there. I mean, yeah, there have been big time efforts to try to find it. And it drives you crazy thinking, why can't they find it? But no luck.
All right, and a couple more. Anna just comments on Alex's book that it's her book Salvage Pages works well with young adults. And then Robert says, as teachers of history, this is a great starting point for asking students if there are other groups who could not tell their own story. How would students retrieve this history and give those people a voice?
Yeah.
And then Becky Henderson comments, one of the biggest takeaways students can have from studying this is that they can write their own story. Living through the pandemic has given them a story to write, and it makes the connection meaningful and real. In fact, Alexandra Zapruder has
Yes.
a project on just that, is allowing students to chronicle their own experiences during the pandemic.
Right. I think making that connection, allowing students to make some kind of personal connection, current relevant connection is really important.
Okay, so Alex, go ahead and share your link on that in the chat. She's kind of listening in. And then Deborah Brown says the archives truly personalize the daily struggle in the ghetto. Students are moved by the personal stories to remember. I can see this used effectively in language arts as well.
Good. The personal stories are just haunting. I mean, just, you know, where you read about the children's centers, where they're trying to provide a little bit of food and a little bit of escape for children. You know, people who are trying to still create libraries, the soup kitchens, you know, where Auerbach talks about seeing whole families disappear, you know, before your eyes, where they come in for soup and then the same ones come in with the same pot, and then some are gone and they come in with the same pot, and just these very, very personal stories, people selling their belongings, their clothing, breaking their furniture down, you know, selling anything and everything they have. Yeah, the personal stories are really powerful.
So we have 2 more comments, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back. One is from Anna. She says, as to the Jewish councils, I would not want to walk 1 meter in their shoes, and judging their survivalist decisions is a highly complicated matter. And then Kate comments, thank you, Amy. This is amazing. This will tremendously help students make a connection to this story. I also love your point about different forms of resistance. This paints this for students to see it in action and grasp different ways that resistance can exist. And just so you all know, Alexandra has put a link to her program called Dispatches from Quarantine that was on NPR. And there's some other things. So check your chat on there for things from Alex about that program. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 10:28 now, and let's come back about 10:40. And Amy's going to go over the teacher's guide.
Well, and included, what I love about this teacher's guide is you're gonna see some really unique photographs and documents that were found in the archive that really aren't available anywhere online. And so I'm really excited about these were from the Jewish Historical Institute, so I'm really excited about using these. But okay, so we'll come back at 10:40, right, Ann?
Right, so everybody, you could just stay on if you want to mute or turn your video off, or you just want to stay and chat with each other, that's fine. And we'll be back about 10:40. Okay, everybody, well, welcome back. And this second part, Amy's going to go over the teacher's guide, and then afterwards I'm going to share some resources with you. And if you are an Alabama teacher, I will show you how you can make sure that you're getting credits for this. And if you're not an Alabama teacher and you do want credits, the BHEC can issue you a certificate if that would work for you. So you will have to get in touch with me and let me know about that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amy.
Okay. All right. More than likely, I mean, depending on how much conversation we have, I mean, this may not last till a whole another hour as far as 11:30, but we'll just kind of be informal and take it as we go. Just to kind of start going through the teacher's guide, I'm gonna scroll through a lot of it, and then we're gonna stop and look at a few portions. Course of study, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now just to tell you about this film, if you've never seen or used this film, it's free film, Path to Nazi Genocide. You can find it at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And the great part about this film is it provides a really concise, it's about 38 minutes long, but the good thing about it is it's split up into chapters. I think it's either 3 or 4 different chapters. And, each of these chapters, maybe 12 to 15 minutes long. So you could do it and you could split it up. And it's something that I do use. Okay, so if you decide to use this film, I've come up with some questions, because if your students are anything like mine, they need an activity to keep them focused during any kind of video or film. So these questions go right along with Path to Nazi Genocide. Activity 2, this also came from the Holocaust Museum in DC. Article about Warsaw and the Warsaw Ghetto, provides some great background on specifically Warsaw, even pre-war Jewish life, which is another good, point to make to students before starting the story. There's also a little animated map that it's not just a map, it has information that goes along with it. So this gives some really good background on Warsaw and the Warsaw Ghetto. Did you like how I put, if you look at number 3 right here, I have them do what I call an article summary, where they summarize it. They choose a phrase or a sentence from the article, and they explain why it stood out to them. And then I say, list 2 questions you have, but I have to be specific and say, I don't have any questions, is not an acceptable response. A dialectical journal. I didn't come up with, I started to come up with chapter by chapter questions. Those are fine, and I may still end up doing that, but this dialectical journal, they split the page in half, and they're going to label each chapter. Throughout the book, they can pick and choose quotes from the book that they want to use, and they put the quote on one side and then they put their reaction on the other side. And obviously all of these are things that you can decide, I use this, I don't use this, feel free to do as you please. Now, this is my favorite part of the teacher's guide. So these are photographs or some examples of photographs and documents that were found in the archive. There were hundreds of photographs that were stored in the archive, but the majority of them were ruined by water, and water seepage and the elements. Approximately 70 were saved. I think it's actually 76. So what we're going to do 1 or 2 of these together, like we would do it in class, and then I'll just kind of hit and miss some of the others. But if we do this activity together, and I want y'all to unmute and pipe in. These photographs really do not have captions. They do not have dates. They do not have photograph taken by. When I asked Sam Casal who took these photographs, he was not even sure. He was going to have to try to look and find out. So we don't really know, I don't think, who took these photographs. So if we look at this photograph here, let me get the questions in. Okay, so if some of y'all would just kind of participate. Okay, so let's just go through it together really quickly. Okay, what can you tell about the setting or location? Do I need to make it bigger?
It's cold.
Okay, so I'm like cold. Okay, it's cold because everybody has on coats, hats. Any other comments about what you think the setting is or the location?
In a city.
Okay. What do you think is happening?
Some people are smiling.
Mhm.
They don't seem worried.
Okay.
I think I see someone pointing. Maybe they've never seen this kind of camera before.
Yep. Smiling, pointing. Who do you think might be taking the photograph?
Someone friendly.
Okay. You know, there
Any-
were German photographers in the ghetto. I mean, we don't know. I would assume that this was not a German, you know, the propaganda photographers in the ghetto. I guess this was not a propaganda type of situation. And obviously it's in the archive, so it's not. So what questions do you have after you look at this photograph?
This
Where-
had to have been early on before they, suspected anything, or maybe even before they knew it was closed.
Okay.
Where's the person standing taking the photograph? Because it's
Mhm.
up high.
On something. So
Why are they gathered there would be neat.
where are they gathered?
Or why?
Why are they gathered? Okay. So Sam kind of did a Zoom with me. We went over each of these, the things that I'm using, and then he kind of gave me context for each of these. So I think a good practice is we show students the photograph. We let them figure out what they think is happening. What are they seeing? What kind of questions does this evoke? Then we're gonna share some of the context. And some of this is really unsure, but for the most part, this was on the ghetto street, and you can tell from the ghetto, I mean, just the photograph itself shows you about the overcrowding in the ghetto streets. It was very hard to move around, to go from place to place. To, running errands took hours at a time. But the photograph, he says it was probably taken near the Judenrat building, and it shows a crowd happy, like y'all said, happy about something. They're smiling, they're pointing. They don't look afraid or fearful.
Which, Amy, to me, a lot of the pictures that we see and then we use in the classroom, you see the other side of the story. This kind of humanizes.
Yes.
In my opinion, it humanizes.
Yes, I agree. In fact, that's why I love this photograph, is because you can kind of use this photograph to contradict what the Germans were trying to do with their propaganda photos. The Germans wanted to show Jews as dirty, parasitic, disgusting, weak, filthy. But this, like you said, Rebecca, really humanized. These are individuals. These are people. The Oneg Shabbos wanted to show Jewish agency. These are faces of individual people with individual lives, with individual families. It's one of the
The
reasons.
language arts teacher in me says, it's a great lesson on perspective.
Okay, so let's look at the next. Also love this. Has anybody ever seen this? Everybody in the ghetto had a ration card. And I don't know if you can see some of I had to ask a lot of questions about translation and what this actually meant. So the translation is food ration card. And it's written in German and Polish, and the German was always in much bigger, bolder letters, and the Polish was always in much smaller letters. The word razna up here means various, because there would be different distributions of different foods on different days. For example, on a certain day, there may be a distribution of beets. On the next day, there may be a distribution of, you know, some other type of radish, you know, potato or something like that. So razna meant various, maca meant flour, and marmalade was like this artificial synthetic jelly-like substance. So I think it's really interesting that students see these ration cards and that they actually have a clue about what, you know, we want to stress to them again, the low calorie or caloric intake that the Jews in the ghetto were restricted to. And if you ask kids, you know, how many calories do you think you or an average person consumes on a normal day? That's making it personal. Have them define ration. And then this is an excerpt found in the Oyineg Chavez archive. This is also highlighted in the film, Who Will Write Our History. There's a segment of a man who's reading a larger portion of this essay. But this man is talking about his hunger. And he's talking about how the hunger is just, you know, consuming his everyday life. And he's counting the hours, 8 hours, 7 hours before he can get his bowl of soup. And he says, the way he ends it is, you know, I am hungry, I am hungry, I am hungry. And I think a good combination is to look at that ration card and then to have students look at this excerpt from a personal story of how hungry people actually were and what that was like. So we already talked about the rations. Another thing that I forgot to point out was, so soup kitchens and smuggling did help as far as increasing the calorie count. But one of the things that was also in the archive was there were doctors and nurses in the ghetto who did an actual official secret study on the properties of slow starvation. Okay, so this is, you know, it's like they're watching it in real time. I mean, they are literally watching people slowly starve to death, and they are writing essays about how this, you know, what the properties are from a medical point of view.
I wanted to comment on one thing that just came to my mind when you were talking about that, and that is the adequacy of language. That, you know, for students to describe what is hunger and what is your hunger when you've missed a meal, and what is your hunger when you've missed a day of food, and what is your hunger after a week of food, and how do you describe hunger? We only have one word for hunger. And so how do you further describe what these people are feeling?
Mm-hmm. All right, this photograph, kind of the same activity as the first. We would ask kids, okay, where do you think this is happening? What do you see happening? What do you think is happening? Who do you think took the photograph? And what questions do you have after this? Now, any kind of comments or even the way that this photograph was taken,
I noticed the guy right here who's like turned around looking at the photographer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wonder what he's thinking.
Yeah. It almost, do you think the camera's hidden? The way that the angle and the way that even the way that the picture is taken, it looks like it might be taken in a hurry, and it looks like, you know, they're kind of maybe hiding the camera. You know, they're not staging it. They couldn't really seem to get around this pole right here. So this could have been a photograph that was taken very, very, very secretly.
It reminds me of the book, The Hidden Camera, the photographs from the Łódź ghetto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, as far as smuggling goes, I really learned a lot about kind of the whole economy. There was a ghetto economy, so to speak. Food wasn't really the only item being smuggled. And there were all of these connections between Jews in the ghetto and Poles, even on the Aryan side. And these business things that were being, you know, Poles were making money also smuggling things into the ghetto. Jews were making money smuggling things out and selling to Poles on the other side. But, you know, these secret little businesses sprang up where Jews would, in the ghetto, would go around. They collected rags and scrap and cloth and old sheets, and they would be, you know, stripped down and made into thread, and they would be repurposed into things like socks. Believe it or not, socks were a huge moneymaker. As you know, products that they could make and sell. So these secret enterprises, now people worked in ghetto workshops, German workshops, work cards, necessary for the war effort, essential workers. But then they work all day, and then they come home and maybe have these secret enterprises where they're, you know, everything is to make money, and every cent or zloty of money that's made is then being turned around and spent probably on food so that they can feed their families. But the secret economy and the secret enterprises in the ghetto opened up a whole nother world for me, because I knew nothing about this. Here, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but you see kind of the differences in situations. Okay, here are some children probably in an orphanage or a children's center. And then you contrast that with the street children. And Ringelblum, Rachel Auerbach wrote so much about just the devastation of seeing these children begging, starving, orphaned on the streets. Opashinsky, I mentioned him earlier, he was the ghetto mailman, writes a whole essay called Children on the Pavement. And when we have kids look at the different scenarios and situations that children were in, then have them read this excerpt from Opashinsky. He says, "Children on the streets, however, are the war's darkest stain, and it can't be washed away." And he talks about the hungry, abandoned children and what could they be feeling, and how every day there are more and more abandoned children. There were attempts to help children in the ghetto. There were children's centers, soup kitchens, orphanages. These were organized by different Jewish institutions, even the Judenrat. But for the most part, a large proportion of children in the ghetto were unable to get any type of help. Ann and I were talking about this photograph yesterday. Can you tell what they're buying and selling?
Wood?
Okay, yeah, wood on the left.
Is it coal on the right?
Okay, yeah, pieces of coal. So there's, if you look at the people in the photograph, even the woman, look at her coat. And this is a ghetto street, and you can look at the crowd. This is some type of, there was all kinds of buying and selling every day on the ghetto streets, whether we're talking wood and coal, whether we're talking old clothing, everything being bought and sold went to buy food. Now, as far as the context of this photograph, the deal with the coal is this was smuggled. I mean, coal had to be smuggled in because the Germans didn't allocate any coal to the Jews in the ghetto. And unless you had coal to burn, then that meant that all pipes would freeze. There wouldn't be any running water. There wouldn't be any way to dispose of waste. And for a while, and this also kind of shows the differences even within the ghetto, there were still different classes of people. There were Jews who in the ghetto who had more means than others. There were people who could somehow stay alive and buy things and continue to sell off their possessions. When the ghetto was formed, if you were able to stay in your apartment or home, then you had a vast advantage over somebody who had to pick up and move into the ghetto. And you certainly were at an advantage over refugees who were herded in from outlying areas and just kind of forced into the ghetto. So if you already lived in the area that became cordoned off and became the ghetto, then you were ahead of a lot of other people because you still had your home, you still had possessions you could sell, you could kind of sell off your things slowly. Others didn't have that benefit. We've already mentioned, and I think Anna mentioned earlier, not ever wanting to be in the shoes of the Jewish Council. This man in the middle is Adam Cherniakov. He was head of the Judenrat, head of the Jewish Council in the Warsaw Ghetto. The men surrounding him are the Jewish police. And the relationship between the Jewish Council, the Jewish police, and other people in the Jews in the ghetto was very, very complex and complicated. The Jewish Council was being put in the awful predicament of having to carry out German orders in the ghetto. They were the ones who made the deportation list. They were the ones who had to get the Nazi decrees and then relay them to the people. The Jewish police were in an awful predicament. They're the ones sometimes doing the roundups. But if you agree to be a Jewish policeman, maybe you get a better place to live. Maybe you get more food. Maybe your family doesn't go on the deportation list. So there were a lot of complicated feelings and relationships when you talk about the Jewish Council and the Jewish police, and very, very, very difficult choices that people were forced to make. don't know, Adam Chernyakov also kept a journal. And on the day of the Great Deportation, or even before then, actually, when he was given the order to round up the children out of the orphanages and send them to the collection point, he refused and committed suicide. He often compared himself to being like the captain of the Titanic. And he cared very, very deeply about children and went out of his way to try to help them as much as he could. The Judenrat, the Jewish police, have you ever heard of it? You know, it's one of those gray areas. You know, it's very difficult to say, oh, I would have never. It's not black and white. These are scenarios where people are forced to make very, very, very difficult decisions. All right, this was also found in the ghetto, in the archive. This was an invitation to a children's performance. So look at the date. Anything stand out to you about even this date or this period of time?
That's right before the Great Deportation.
Yeah, so I mean, even a couple of weeks, so we're 2 years into the ghetto and conditions have only deteriorated, but even at this point, and even we're at a couple of weeks before the Great Deportation, there are still attempts at humanity, you know, cultural and spiritual resistance. This is a children's benefit. The Femina Theater was one of the largest theaters in the ghetto, and they're raising money. It's called the Children's Holiday, or the Day of Children. And you know, you can ask students. We're 2 years after the formation of the ghetto. Think about all the things we've talked about so far, the conditions and the tragedies and the starvation. Why would people continue to have concerts, plays, and performances? You know, this is an attempt, once again, to care for children, and it's also an attempt, you know, to maintain some sort of humanity. Okay, so at the end, there's an answer key. We all love answer keys. And that kind of wraps it up. I tried to not make it too intense, but we're gonna make this available. Ann, aren't you putting it on the resources page on the website?
Right now it is, I put it in the chat box. I gave you the direct, the
Good.
PDF. But you can also, if you go to the BHEC's website, the store, where you also can link to Amazon to buy the book, there is a direct link to this teacher workshop to the teacher's guide with no charge.
Yeah. And just because, I mean, y'all, this is a work in progress. I haven't used the book with any, you know, this past year was not really a good year to try to promo a book, so to speak. So if you are able to use it, if you're able to use the teacher's guide, I mean, I'm going to be using it. I'm going to be kind of guinea pig with my students. And if you're able to use it, I would love any input you know, the questions your students have, any experiences you have with it, good things, positive things, negative things. suggestions as far as the teacher's guide goes. I would love any kind of input or suggestions you might have. Because I only, I want to make it something that's really, really teacher friendly and student friendly. So I'm wide open. I would love for you to let me know how it goes, what I can do, whatever. And does anybody have any questions or comments about kind of how anything you saw in the teacher's guide, anything? Anything?
Oh, I'm just curious if there are any classroom sets of the book available. I've ordered a copy for myself.
No, not at this point. I mean, I don't have any classroom sets. I'm not sure about, I don't know if I'm not sure about the BHEC if they're.
I'm just curious. I have kind of a big class coming up, so I know I'm going to need a few copies. I really am interested in using it.
Cool. Okay, who is that? Who's talking? I didn't see.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Deborah.
Oh yeah, hey. And where are you? What school?
Sorry, I'll tune in. I teach in a small Catholic school in Robertsdale outside of Mobile.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm in Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will say that the BHEC will probably purchase enough to have a classroom set. The logistics for you, Deborah, would be getting it to Mobile. But if you were willing to come up, if we purchased it and you were willing to come up and get it, then that would be a possibility. So for teachers, within driving distance or something, that may be an option. I mean, this is all very new, so we're trying to work out logistics.
Yeah. And the book is on Amazon. That's the believe you me figuring that out was a good one. But as far as me having any classroom sets, I don't even have a classroom set at this point for my own students.
Okay. All right.
So I'm trying to, I'm thinking about, looking into a couple of small grants that I could do to my classroom set.
Right. Well, I will also talk. I'm a member of our Gulf Coast Holocaust organization.
Yeah.
So I will talk to them about maybe ordering something. I think that would be a great resource.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Amy, I have a quick question.
Okay.
Do you think you might be available to Zoom into a classroom and to talk about the background to the book and your research?
Heck yeah.
Okay, great. So
yeah, I would really love to do that. I mean, I would, that's really, I would be honored to do that. I mean, if people wanted me to do it, I would be glad to.
Yeah, I think that would be great for my course coming up. I think that would be great for my students.
Yeah.
Prior to using it. I always like them to have that sort of background, how someone goes about doing research.
Yeah.
And the teacher's guide is available on your website, on the website?
Yeah, it's going to be on the BHEC website.
Okay.
And another funny story, I actually have a website, which Anne said, you need to update your website. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how to even do that. I mean, it is updated, but I've got to put the Amazon link on there. But
and the teacher's guide.
And the teacher's guide, yes.
Yeah.
Amy, would you also give us your email again?
Yes. Hold on, let me pull that back up.
So Jennifer commented, have you thought about recording yourself reading it and posting it on YouTube? My students get frustrated with pronouncing names. I teach 6th graders. And Haley Walker, even for Audible. She doesn't know how that happens, but you could try.
I could try. No, I really hadn't thought about reading it, but that's a great idea. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Anybody else? Well, before Anne, I think is going to go over a few different things, but I just really wanted to thank all of you for coming today, for being here. It's summer vacation, and I just really appreciate it, and I really do mean it when I say I would love to do whatever I can. If you want to use it, if you need my help, if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear anything you have to say.
Thank you, Amy. And everybody stay on just a second. Amy, if you would unshare your screen. A couple of housekeeping things. So I've been chatting with a few of you about credits. If you are an Alabama teacher, you need to have registered on Power School. And once we know that you have attended this workshop, we will put your name in and you will be eligible for those credits. There's also a link to a survey that Zoe has put into the chat. If you would not mind filling out that survey. We also, I'm going to share with you right now. There is, hang on a second. This is a quick QR code. If you just want to put your phone over that, it'll go straight to our survey and you can do it on your phone real quickly right now. Quite easy to do that. So that's a couple of different ways to approach that survey. Alabama teachers, we need that survey in order to qualify you for the Power School credits. As far as the other teachers, I have 5 names of teachers that want me to send them a certificate. Debbie Maller, Geraldine Miller, Deborah Brown, Jennifer Edwards, and Andrea Jonas. If there's anyone else, if you would put your name in the chat. If you did not provide me your email, I will use the email that you registered with and send you a certificate. And I'll do that digitally unless you tell me otherwise. I see Jennifer Edwards is now, yeah, she's asking about an attendance certificate. Yeah, so Jennifer, I will send that to you and those people that I mentioned, unless, you know, so if you do want a certificate, please put that in the chat and I will take a look at that. And then I do want to show you some additional resources. This is the BHEC website. This is the store for Amy's book. And here's the PDF for the teacher's guide here. And then you can buy it on Amazon or you can click on this and go into more information about this. So this is the link that I provided you in the chat. I also wanted to show you, because Amy and I were looking at this yesterday, we have a section called curriculum links.
Hey, Anne, we can't see your, we see the PowerPoint, not your.
We only see the QR code.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me stop share and reshare because sometimes it doesn't. Okay, hold on. Hang on. Okay. If I switch, like, can you see if I go into the store here? Hold on, I'm going into the store. Do y'all see this? Do you see the store?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the store. Here's Amy's book. Here's that teacher's guide link. Okay, and that is also in the chat. And then I wanted to show you on our curriculum links, which is right here under classroom resources, curriculum links. The way our links are set up is if you scroll down, and for this particular piece, we're looking at specific ghettos here, and this opens up below. And if you scroll down to Warsaw, there are a vast number of resources on the Warsaw Ghetto from all different places, including the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The reason some of these are in brackets is because they're also included under our resistance section. But videos are all labeled as such, and there are a considerable number of videos. Here's a video about Rachel Auerbach in the public kitchen that is from Yad Vashem. So there are a lot of videos here. Here's about the letter carrier. And these video toolbox pieces from Yad Vashem are wonderful. So please take a look at this, and it will just add more resources for your classroom.
Anne,
Yes.
I just want to give a thumbs up on that those video clips from the Educator's Toolbox at Yad Vashem are so good. They're anywhere from, 8 to, I don't know, 12 minutes, something like that. They're really
5 and 6 minutes each, very short. Yeah. So I think that's about it from my end. Any questions? let's see, wait, hold on a second. Somebody else say Jennifer Edwards, we got that. Becky, she teaches in New York. She wants one. Okay, I got you, Becky. And I think that's it. Okay.
Well, not only was it a wonderful to do this to a group of teachers, but it's also wonderful to see so many of your faces. I really mean that. I've missed you. And I can't wait to see everybody again.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. And have a great next few weeks, the rest of your summer.
Thank you all so much. Email, call, whatever. Bye.
Bye.